Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. As I'm sure you're aware by now, we're working with our partners Kia UK this summer. Kia have been embedded in the world of cricket for almost 15 years. They've actively supported the rise of women's cricket since 2014 and have been the proud sponsors of Surrey County Cricket Club for the last decade. Kia are in fact our very own neighbours here at the Kia Oval, the home of Surrey County Cricket Club. During each episode of the podcast, Kia will provide you with an opportunity to get closer to the action through their Kia's Movement That Inspires moment. These include tickets and experiences to key cricket competitions across the summer. Listen out each week to hear how you could get involved and win the opportunity of a lifetime. Anyway, on with the show. Australia prevail in another Ashes test to remember. Ash Gardner's 12-wicket haul trumps Sophie Ecclestone's 10-fer at Trent Bridge. We are one day out from the Lord's Test, before which England have made another typically bold selection call. The County Championship has returned. West Indies are on the brink of missing out on World Cup qualification. And the 317-page report from the Independent Commission for Equity in Cricket has found that English cricket suffers from widespread and deep-rooted racism, sexism and elitism. A lot to get stuck into today. I'm Rana, and with me this morning is Katya, Witney and Gardner. Mark Butcher will be joining us shortly, as will Santokie Nagulendran from the Caribbean Cricket Podcast to talk about everything that's going on with West Indies cricket at the moment. Let's start with the Trent Bridge Test. Listeners of the recent daily shows will know that, Katya, you were there for all 5 days. How much of a missed opportunity is this for England? 55 for naught chasing, 268 to go 4-0 up in the series. It's a very long way back now for England.
I think it's huge. I think the match was a lot closer than a lot of people expected. And I think they'll see it as a massive missed opportunity, particularly given the manner in which some of them got out in that last innings. I mean, Nats and Brunt's dismissal kind of springs to mind that that was something that she really probably shouldn't have done. But even when they were 2 or 3 down, they still could have chased it. They absolutely could have chased it. But I think it's a massive missed opportunity, and it's a shame that with this test being first and with the most points awarded for the test, that they're now so far down, and then it's going to be so difficult for them to come back from that. Obviously it's not completely over. They could, pull a fast one. They could keep it going until the ODI series or mid ODI series. But yeah, I think it is a bit of a missed opportunity.
You were saying before we recorded that the test is a bit of a leveller in that neither side plays that much long form cricket, and you'd expect that Australia will be even stronger than they were for the test match in the white ball stuff.
Yeah, completely. I mean, I said test match cricket is a leveller, and it is, but I think a lot, maybe too much, is made out of the fact that neither of them have played much long format cricket.
You also look at the fact that Australia almost don't know the strengths of their own players. Like Talia McGrath, who's probably their best, was the best team throughout the game, came on 6th change in the first innings. Like that's absurd to think of that speaks to their depth, that they can, just cycle through their bowls until they find one who will do quite a lot of work to win the game. But equally it shows
Annabelle
that
Sutherland looked all right at 8 as well.
Yes, yeah. But it shows they're kind of learning kind of as the game goes on who their strengths are and not. And Annabelle Sutherland also, she was coming off 100 in one of the warm-up games. I think she had a word with the coach afterwards and saying and it's like, maybe put it in the audience. And I think you'll be all right on it. You'll play, but you're going at 8. I think the Lop series will be interesting. And I think one thing that shows that it's not necessarily the gap between the sides is narrowing, but that right now, just because of missing Meg Lanning, that it might be narrow is just the fact that Alyssa Healy is so determined to keep playing. Basically, she's got these 2 broken fingers that she's playing through the whole test with.
Yeah, I feel like not enough is being made of this. Yeah, that's quite a big deal. So 2 broken fingers, 1 in each hand.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of injuries sustained during the game. Kate Cross also dislocated a finger, popped it back in, came back, and then bowled maybe the ball of the test match to kind of the sort of, I don't know if it was a cutter or if it just decked back in. And then Kate Cross was kind of speaking at stumps that day, being like, yeah, I've really been through the wars, and I'm the one who wants to play loads more of this. But the fact that Alyssa Healy is so determined to stick around, that obviously speaks to her character, but also speaks to the fact that Australia is a team that they need leaders, and actually they're kind of looking around for them and beyond Healy now that with Lanning out, if Healy were not to be there, then they would maybe be missing that aspect of it. So I think that they'll be interesting, the white ball series, but I almost don't view them in the context of the whole Ashes series, which is pretty much gone. View them in the context of if England can nick one of them, that would still be a massive result from, considering how strong Australia are, I think.
Later in the show, you'll hear me and Butch talk about the format of the series with a test match taking worth 4 points at the start of the series. I personally thought that was quite a good system when it looked like England were going to win it, but England haven't won it, and Australia's stronger in white ball cricket. You'd expect there to be quite a few dead rubbers. Hopefully not, but there's a reasonable chance that you might have up to 4 dead rubbers. If you were to change the system, would you?
Well, I would, but in terms of if you have the number of games as they are right now, it's difficult to come up with the perfect system. And partly as well, it's because regaining the Ashes is and should be really hard, basically. Like to win a series, that is something that is tough. And so that means that if you lose a big game early on, then it should be hard to win it from that point on. Like, this is only kind of an issue because Australia are so good, but that's not the fault of the structure of the series, or that's not England's fault. That's just the way that cricket happens to be at the moment. And the issue, if you do have a one-off test, if you put it anywhere else in the series, if you put it in the middle, then the team that wins the first series, especially if Australia had won that, then they would know that a draw would like almost certainly, secure them the Ashes again. If you put it at the end, it might be a dead rubber, or again, it might be the fact that a team knows they can draw it and win the Ashes, which could encourage some negative play. I think that's the risk of that negative play is slightly decreased with a 5-day test, or it's significantly decreased actually, because you saw in this game, both teams were able to make big scores.
It's also very hard to play for a draw in a 5-day test match early on.
Yeah, in a 4-day test, that's a lot easier. In a 5-day test, that is hard. And you saw here that like the game just reached a result just because the pitch broke up and the teams had 2 good spinners. But in terms of the format going forward, my personal preference, I think, would be working towards at some point just a 3-test Ashes series. And I wouldn't be totally against it being 3 tests and then some white ball stuff. But actually, I think my personal preference would be just have the women's Ashes be the pinnacle women's test cricket event in the world and have it set apart like that. And you've got the World Cup and you've got the T20 World Cup that highlights, limited overs cricket for on the global stage, and this can be the main thing that is played in like a pinnacle event just by itself, I think.
But we had the Ashes used to be 3 test matches back in the day, then it got down to 1 test, and that was what you'd play the Ashes for, but then you'd also have the multi-format stuff. And the reason that it isn't like that anymore is because, speaking to the players, they said it got really stale and that they didn't enjoy playing it anymore because that's the only time they play test cricket. So if you only play test cricket at that point and then you ask them to play 3 test matches, then inevitably it's not going to be as good a competition as if you play it through a multi-format thing. Personally, I'd like to see there be 2 test matches, 1 at the end and 1 at the beginning, because that would keep the series alive a lot more. And I also thought that at the test, it's such a shame now that we can't see those narratives that started during this test match play out to the level that they could play out over the white ball series. You said Alyssa Healy's fingers and the injuries in the England squad. There was also some needle in the test, and I don't think that plays out in the same way in white ball cricket as it does in long format cricket. So if you had that carrot of another test match at the end of the series, I think that would be a really good way to play it, and also a good way to get more test cricket into the women's game before you can put in place the domestic structures in order to facilitate that.
Yeah, I guess if you had 2 4-point tests, if you had another test coming up now, because I personally would feel maybe if you keep them together, then firstly you have them in blocks, but also you just have players who are test ready. But yeah, like you'd have England, like Lauren Filer say in her battle with Elise Perry, for example. You'd have that could then get played out again.
But then you've also got
and just 2 4-point games as well. So just in terms of the actual point structure, that could be quite compelling, because England now 4 points down, fine, but they'd know if they won that second test and they'd be right back in contention for the Ashes again.
Yeah, but if you look at the men's series and it's the 5-test series, it's almost like a battle of which team is still on the park at the end, or who's got their most kind of frontline players still on the park at the end with all that rest and rotation. When you go into the white ball stuff, that element gets taken out of it, and I think that is a really important element of the Ashes. And so many series have been decided on players getting injured and all that kind of stuff, and it's taken out of the women's Ashes. And I think that would be a really important story that you could add into it if you played another test at the end, by keeping those players on the park.
Yeah, I can see that. And would Filer be able to play a back-to-back test with Sophie Oxen having bowled 80 overs in the game? Maybe that's unlikely, and that's an advantage, I guess, of almost having a bit of a break in the middle. The other thing as well, in terms of what not what's the best format, but what's the best scheduling, I guess, for this in terms of exposure and having it, be the main event that it deserves to be, right? And as you were saying before the show, is to have like the women's Ashes actually maybe separated from the men's Ashes. I mean, they've promoted it really well this year. I mean, there's that Ashes to Ashes campaign, isn't it? Which has probably put it on a level footing from a promotional point of view. But like next summer, especially when it's a low-key summer for the England men's team, that would be the pinnacle international cricket of the summer. Whereas right now, you've just got everything is just so squeezed. Just with the 100, obviously, meaning you can't play into August, and then with news breaking all the time with the World Test Championship final in the summer as well. At least they've managed to find a 5-day gap for the women's test, but it's still kind of not subsumed. But you've got there is focus drawn a little bit elsewhere with who's going to play at Lords, is Moeen going to be fit, what's Michael Clark said today, that sort of thing, which doesn't detract from it at all, but sort of like it just could be the cricket that everyone is talking about, and it's not quite that because of the fact they're trying to use the men's Ashes to haul it up. I think it's doing the opposite a little bit.
I think there's a tendency to stick with like the narrative, or like not narrative, that's the wrong word, but to stick with what's been tried with women's cricket. And they do like the double headers, playing the 100, the double headers, and it's using the men's game to promote the women's game. But I think there's a kind of oversight that when you give the women's game the right conditions to succeed, it absolutely will succeed, and it will succeed in its own right. We saw with that test match, there was, I think, 23,000 people came and saw it across the 5 days, whereas 7,000 came to Taunton last year to see South Africa play. And I still don't think that Trent Bridge was completely the right environment for the women's test match to succeed. But it will succeed on its own, and it can be played as a standalone outside the men's Ashes. And before the series started, I was very much on board with the Ashes to Ashes and thinking that was a really good way to promote the game. But as you said, it's so squeezed and there's so much of it that I think that it could have been even more of a success if it was played either next year or at a completely different time in the summer to when the men's was played.
There were some huge performances from England in defeat. Sophie Ecclestone obviously taking 10 in the game, bowling 77.1 overs overall. Tammy Beaumont's double 100. But also an encouraging performance from a new name in Lauren Filer, who bowled with excellent pace. She very nearly got Elise Perry out with her first ball in Test cricket. Katya, how impressed were you with Filer? And do you think she comes into England's thinking for the white ball stuff?
John Lewis talked about that in press conference after the match, and he wasn't sure. I think he's concerned about managing her workload because she is still pretty young, and playing a long form cricket game when she won't have played any long form cricket before aside from that practice match beforehand is obviously a big task on your body. But he did say she would come into their thought process for it, and she was really impressive. There were times in the match where it looked like England just weren't going to take a wicket, and then she came on and suddenly the best batters in women's cricket were struggling against her. And maybe that does come in slightly that she was an unknown, but it also shows you what pace can do. And I think I said in one of the dailies that it was a big thing for her to come in and replace Izzy Wong, because I think everyone expected Izzy Wong to play, because in the last Test match she was brilliant, and she's been brilliant over the last year. And also, given that she's such a big personality and that she's one of the best known names in the game in this country, if she'd come in and done a bad job, then it would have looked really bad. But coming in and succeeding like that, it was really, really impressive, and she did probably as good a job as she could have done, especially on a pitch that really wasn't easy to bowl on as a fast bowler.
The thing that I find amazing was that there's so much chat about bowlers. They'd really come on leaps and bounds if they just put on an extra yard of pace. It's actually really rare that actually happens.
Well, John Lewis was saying in the in a press conference after the game, he said that he was looking at a few bowlers around the country that he thinks he could put on an extra mile of pace with and get them bowling up near 80 miles an hour. And it's really interesting to think that a coach is that confident, having not spent that much time with the players, that he can just make them bowl faster. And he said he'd done that with Lauren Filer over the last few months. So Lauren Filer last year was bowling low to mid 70s, and now she's up in late 70s. She's really quick, and he's done that in a really short space of time. And I think that's really interesting. I'd love to sit down with him and ask, what actually have you done with these players?
Really interesting, actually. Definitely. And it was the fact she sustained her pace as well, right? Like her last spell in the game was pretty much as quick as her first. She was still hitting that 76 mile an hour mark, which is properly quick. Yeah, I think it's I mean, maybe she'll play, and maybe T20 is almost more the format for her than ODIs. Like, I think in a way, like she, like, the economy of her spells won't really be dictated by how much teams try and attack her, because she's bowling some balls that are like almost unplayable, and she's bowling some balls that, like, if you throw your bat at because the ball is coming on so fast, it might well fly away. And so in T20 cricket, in fact, if she has kind of like a natural economy rate, but she will take wickets, that's almost a better thing in T20 cricket than ODI cricket, when, you know, an economy of 8, say, is more harmful than it is in T20 cricket, and in T20 cricket when new ball wickets are so important in that power play. I guess the 2 other questions for England will be, does Beaumont's incredible form, do they just make basically a form pick? They think, okay, we've got a player who is, you know, seeing the ball better than anyone else on the planet. Do we just back them in T20 cricket, which she's not currently a part of, especially when, I mean, you'd be picking more on that than excluding Dunkley based on her struggles. That would be harsh, I think. But equally, if Dunkley had come out and, you know, smashed a 70 or whatever, then that wouldn't really be a question.
Again, I have a line from John Lewis on that as well.
Not happening.
He said it would definitely come more into their thinking than it would have before she scored 2 back-to-back double hundreds, which I think is probably quite an obvious comment. But he said that he doesn't. He said it. He was asked about it, sat next to Danny Wyatt, who is obviously opens for England in T20s. And he said that he would consider it, but he doesn't see it. The gist I got from it was, no, it's not going to happen.
Okay.
But he said, I thought Dunkley played really well. And I was just thinking about her first innings where she objectively didn't play well. And yeah, I think it should come into the equation, but whether it will or not, I don't know.
And did he have anything to say on the wicketkeeper question as well, or Amy Jones backed? And
no, he didn't say anything on the wicketkeeper question.
Yeah, because we were discussing this yesterday, but Amy Jones averages less than 10 in both white ball formats against Australia, and that's
from a pretty big sample size.
Yeah, high score of 30. So there's not even one knock you can kind of, you know, pin your hopes to. The questions we were discussing yesterday is who is as good a keeper as her, rather than are you replacing her batting, and that's comes more into the equation when you're standing up to the stump so much. But yeah,
Ben, we've got to talk about Ash Gardner. Long been a huge part of Australia's success. She pulled the rug beneath England's feet in that 4th innings. England looked like obviously they were going to win the game, and then she takes 8 in the innings and 12 overall in the match. She was brilliant. Yeah,
I should say that there's no relation. But yeah, she was absolutely incredible, especially in that second innings, when not just that obviously the figures stand out, but the fact that, you know, Australia were missing Alana King on that 4th evening, and you weren't sure at that point if they were going to be missing her for the whole game. So you've got you know, she at that point is the frontline spinner, right? And England at the point when they're 50 for naught have probably just edged into being favourites, maybe for the first time in the test. And like they needed a cricketer to stand up basically. And Ash Gardner is increasingly that for Australia. I mean, she was player of the tournament at the T20 World Cup, but you know, there's so few test played that she didn't really have the chance to have this landmark performance. And she, you know, she did hit. I mean, she was so consistent, just hitting that good line length every time. The pitch was doing enough by that point, even if it wasn't doing lows, that she was turning some were turning a fair amount, some were turning just a little bit, some were going straight on. And England just really didn't have an answer, basically. It was like an impeccable display of spin bowling on a pitch that's offering you a little bit rather than one that's absolutely ragging square. Yeah, I don't know. Ashes, is that what we're calling it? Yeah, it was amazing.
At the time of recording, England haven't yet named their T20 squad. The T20s get underway on Saturday at Edgbaston. Before we head to Butch, for this episode's Kia's Movement That Inspires moment, Kia is giving you the chance to watch the 5th and final Ashes Test match against Australia at the Kia Oval on July the 30th. Not only will you be able to attend day 4 of the Test match, but you can also watch it from the luxury of the Kia box. For a chance to win a pair of tickets, all you need to do is enter via the link in the description. Let's head to Mark Butcher for his thoughts on the Trent Bridge Test and some of the chat that's being dished out from the England players and also the Aussie ex-pros over the last week. Mark, it felt like a missed opportunity for England at Trent Bridge. They were in a really good position, they were themselves 55 for naught, chasing 268. I think they would have taken that if you gave them that at the start of the game. Where do you think the gaps are between the two sides? Is it necessarily quality? I thought the bowling attacks in particular seemed pretty similar. Or is it in part just the accumulated knowledge of how to get over the line in games like that?
Yeah, well, yes. First and foremost, it was a fantastic test match. And my personal view is that man for man or woman for woman, player for player, there is not a massive amount between the two teams. You had stunning individual performances from both sides, and a relative lack of experience in terms of, well, not relative, actually a huge lack of experience in terms of playing multi-day red ball cricket. And in the end, it hurt England more than it hurt Australia. I felt, it was revealing talking to John Lewis at the end of the game, actually, because he said that their plan had been all along that if England had won the toss, that they would have bowled first, so they did what they wanted to do, and that the plan had been to bowl Australia out, get a lead, and then bowl them out again and have to knock off whatever was left. The sort of bowl them out for 300 tops, get 400, 450 yourselves, and then have another go when the pitch is warm, which is a brave strategy because the pitch looked pretty flat from day one, and had a few catches been taken, they may well have done that. I think they were 240 for 6 or something. So that they were kind of on course to do it, which is great, all fantastic. However, that plan did not come to fruition, and they needed to think out of the box a little bit. And that's where I was critical on the broadcast of the lack of sort of lateral thinking that went on before the beginning of Australia's second innings. So the lead was only 10. There were 19 overs or something left of the day. Sophie Eccleston and spin had been the main weapon in the match up until that point. And we all in the box, it wasn't just me, felt that the best way for England to kind of really get their teeth into Australia and knock them over for sort of 150 was to give the new ball to Sophie Eccleston and try and hold things as tight as they possibly could at the other end. And in the end, it turned out to be a pivotal sort of hour and a half. England went for 80, 82 for none. The lead was 90 at the end of day 3. And from that moment on, they were chasing their tails. And as it was, they kind of got it right the next day on day 4, and took 9 wickets for 100. But by then, it was a little bit too late. And then, of course, they had that sort of headless hour of batting on the final day. On the sort of 4th afternoon to end up 4 down after being 50 for none. So for me, it was pretty much as you described it, that the two teams were pretty well matched right the way through the card. But there were moments in terms of how you actually go about playing the game that really, really let England down. And you can point to drop catches here and there, and some of the shots in that final innings as being where England actually physically lost it. But I think had they not put themselves under so much pressure by getting things tactically wrong, then they might not have made the errors, if you see what I mean. And that's Test match cricket, really. You miss your opportunities, even though the game lasts for 5 days. You have to make your decision. Your decision making has to be pinpoint in order to recognise the moments when you need to either sit back or whether you need to press or the rest of it. And I think it was that naivety that cost England the Test match in the end.
Just a word on Sophie Eccleston. She clearly proved that she was England's go-to bowler in basically every circumstance and every possible condition. She's absolutely brilliant, and it feels like she's been around for ages. She has been around for ages, but she's only recently turned 24. So it's actually kind of scary to think what she might end up achieving in the game.
Yeah, I mean, and there's such lovely variety to her bowling. She's able to kind of go through the gears. She does exactly what the art of spin bowling is, which is to have the ball land in the same spot but get there in about 4 different ways. She's very, very good. I think making comparisons between the men's and women's game is not particularly helpful. But my goodness, if we had one as good as her. Having said that, Liam Dawson's just scored 100 and taken a shed load of wickets for Hampshire, so maybe we do have one. We just don't want to pick him. But if we had one as good as her, we might not be bringing people out of retirement to play Ashes series.
I was wondering how long it would take you to bring up Liam Dawson. Just finally on the women's test, what are your thoughts on the format of the series, in particular 4 points for a test match at the start? I thought that was a pretty good system when it looked like England were going to win it. But now
Yeah.
we haven't won it. It does feel like we could be into dead rubbers quite soon. Australia is just such a good white ball side.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame, and it comes about because of the fact that Australia hold the Ashes already, doesn't it? It means you have to win the Ashes outright in order to wrestle them away from the holders. Look, I think they've juggled around with it quite a lot to try to make it so that the matches have equal relevance. And I think for me, maybe if it's going to remain 4 points, I think maybe you put the Test match at the end. You have the biggest prize or the most prizes at the back end of the series. There's one way of doing it. Or if you want to play the Test match at the beginning, you make it 3 points instead of 4. So it's worth 1.5. 1.5 white ball wins. And then I suppose you then don't have to have the situation where you have to win 5 out of 6. But however, I mean, that's, Australia deserve to have the advantage because number one, they're the holders, and number two, they won the Test. Now that we have the games are played over 5 days, the likelihood is that there will be a result now, as opposed to the sort of terminal draws that we've had in women's Test matches. And so perhaps it can be tweaked and looked at again. But take nothing away from the fact that when it came down to it, Alyssa Healy stood up on the back of 3 knots on the trot. She was dropped. It could have been a very first ball, and that pivotal moment in the game there as well. Then she makes 50, keeps with 2 broken fingers, catches everything, gets everything right in terms of her decision making on the field, and Australia win, funnily enough, by the margin of the head start England gave them in the 3rd innings on that Friday. What day was it? Where were we on the Saturday night? Yeah. So look, I thought it was a great Test. I really do. And if it proved anything at all to the England girls, it was that the gap between them and Australia is not as large, perhaps, as some people might think.
On to the men's series. The 2nd Test starts tomorrow at Lords. Maybe I've just got a short memory, but it does feel like the inter-Test chat is at an all-time high. So Zach Crawley confidently predicted that England would win by, I don't know, 150-ish runs the other day on Times Radio. And then anyone who's anybody really in Australian cricket is coming hard on Ollie Robinson for some of his more bolshy comments over the last few days. What have you made of it? Because, and then amongst it all, the Australian team have actually kept their heads down and kind of just actually been fairly humble in about what they did well and maybe didn't do well at Edgbaston. But the ex-pros are going in hard on Robinson in particular.
Yeah, it's quite funny, really, isn't it? I mean, I think we're winning the banter war. I mean, not that means anything, but just the shocking level of lack of humour, really, in a lot of the stuff coming out of some of the ex-players, and the short memory of the memories of their own, in terms of the nonsense that they used to come up with while they were playing. So it's all quite amusing. And England, I guess the bizarre thing about it is England are 1-0 down, and somehow they're kind of like they're winding the Australians up like they were 3-0, to the worse. None of this will make any difference whatsoever if England's record against Australia at Lords continues in the way that it has done for all time. But it does give you a sort of like an inside view into the sort of the psyche of the Australian male and their protectiveness over their cricket team. And it's quite amusing to watch. It really is. I mean, the whole thing with Ollie Robinson, sort of blokes having a massive pop at his ability as a cricket player. I mean, fair enough, have a go at him as a bloke if you don't like him or don't like what he's saying. But he's taken 70 odd wickets at 21.
He averages less than Pat Cummins, and he also averages less than Pat Cummins in Pakistan as well. I thought that was like kind of the best illustration that he really is quite good on lots of different surfaces.
Yeah, I mean, he's a performer. I mean, obviously his only appearance in Australia in an Ashes contest was not particularly memorable. He had the back injury and was bowling nude nuts, whatever the hell they are, on that trip. But I think some of it has been silly more than anything else. But all adds to the amusement.
You've kind of alluded to it, but Robinson in his press conference after I think day 3 at Edgbaston said that he didn't really think that much of his send off to Khawaja because he said this is what the Australians have always done, and he name checked Ricky Ponting. Robinson obviously hasn't played against Ricky Ponting. You have. What was it like playing against that Australian team? Would they give it pretty good? Because I mean, the big difference in terms of coverage now compared to then is the stump mics are turned up to max. You do really hear almost everything in the middle in a way that probably wasn't the case 20 years ago.
Yeah, I don't recall a massive amount. I mean, there were send-offs. There was all that kind of stuff. People, quite rightly, as Robinson said, people kind of get emotional and kind of the tempers run high at times. But I don't remember there being anything other than that, really. And in terms of that particular send-off, if you want to call it, he wasn't in Kawaja's face. It was kind of it was a slightly sheepish one, if you ask me. It was hardly Merv to Graham Hick, was it? Sort of, he got right up in his grill and spat at him, So I don't know. It's just a massive storm in a teacup, really. But it amuses me because the way that the game's played, or at least the way that on-field behaviour is marshalled, it always seems to be that the Australians are in control of it. So if the Australians want to be really tough and hard and uncompromising on the field, then the way that they're doing that is the best way and the only way to do it. If the Australians are now being sort of humble and kind and nice to one another and showing the game in a perfect light and being inclusive and all the rest of it, then that's the way that everybody else must do it as well. That they've always had this kind of messiah complex about the behavioural norms of the game of cricket, and quite frankly, it's funny.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, I guess part of it is that, with the exception of the 6-year spell around the end of the 2000s, early 2010s, Australia do tend to win most Ashes series. So I guess
that's absolutely fine. Being sort of one of the preeminent sports teams around, they're going to have a lot of success. I think the thing that sticks in a lot of people's throats, and it's not just the English, is the way that they sort of are the sole arbiters of the way people are supposed to behave on the cricket field. I don't see anybody else getting caught with bits of sandpaper and all that kind of stuff. And they then throw out these huge punishments where they strip players of the right to captain Australia and ban them forever. The punishment then doesn't fit the crime. And it's all very puritanical, very, very odd, very, very odd, but most amusing.
Moving to the actual cricket, there's a bit of chat that Josh Tongue might play at Lords. I mean, there's a pretty good chance that when this comes out, England would have named their 11. I guess it's interesting that England haven't named their 11 already. They're pretty used to naming a side for the toss. I guess the feeling is that there might be a bit of grass left on the pitch after how flat it was during the Ireland Test match. And there's a feeling that Mark Wood might not be 100% fit. And in that case, England difference. So I guess Tongue kind of makes sense in that case, with Root doing more bowling than they would have previously planned for.
Yeah, there are a lot more ifs and buts than they would like, aren't there? I mean, sort of Moeen's injury then sort of throws into, does throw up the spectre of going in without a specialist spinner. Don't do it. And of course, Mark Wood not being fit, Jimmy's relative sort of how would you call it? I can't find the right word. It's too early in the morning. No, well, no age, no, but his kind of his lack of potency, I suppose, at Edgbaston may have been a concern, although he could have, could just been a little bit rusty. So that they're not in a sort of that position of real strength, whereby they know exactly how they want to play and exactly what the 11 is going to be, as they have been quite a bit in the past. And part of that is because of some gambles that they've taken in terms of selections, and part of that is because, in truth, they're really, really low on sort of high pace options due to injuries. So, and also, I suppose that we keep trying to keep an eye a little bit on what the weather forecast looked like. That it might change sort of part way through the Test match, but I still think that there's not much you can do about the fact that we've had very, very little rain here for the last couple of months. And so the underlying surface, no matter how much grass you leave on it, is going to be dry. And therefore, as the game goes deeper, you'd imagine that spin plays a big part, even though at Lords it traditionally hasn't been a massive turning surface. But if your pitches end up being unbelievably flat and the fast bowlers can't do anything either, then you end up flogging them to death. You know, if you don't have a spin bowler that you can go to and hold an end for you. So, you know, Australia, no matter what the conditions, Australia will play Nathan Lyon, right? I mean, that goes without saying. And over the course of 5 days, you're going to need a top class spin bowler. Whether we have one or not is a different thing altogether.
Yeah. Just finally, there's been a lot of speculation about who will conditions if there's more grass on the wicket than there was at Edgbaston. Edgbaston was very docile, and there's a bit more pace in the wicket, a bit more movement. Which team does that actually suit? Because both sides are saying it's them.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think traditionally speaking, you're kind of, you know, brings your line bowlers into it, doesn't it? You know, McGrath always loved bowling at Lords. I should imagine that Cummins and Hazelwood would not be unhappy about the ball moving around, and I should imagine that Broad and Anderson would be unhappy with the ball moving around. It then comes down to your batters, doesn't it? It then comes down to in circumstances like that, does a quick 40 help you out, or does somebody digging in and making 130 when wickets are falling at the other end help you out? And the likelihood, the bad probabilities is that Australia have more batters who are likely to dig in and do that than England do. And if England do score runs, they'll score them unbelievably quickly. So I don't know. I mean, look, traditionally Australia have played very, very well at Lords, haven't they? The pitches of Lords have been flatter than at other venues in the country. And on those flatter pitches, which are a little bit more like the sort of conditions you get in Australia, that tends to favour the Australian team more than it favours us.
Cool. Well, it should be a blockbuster second test match if any of the inter-test chat has been anything to go by. But cheers for your time. Catch you next week. All of our Ashes moments of the week are brought to you by our stylish partner, Charles Tyrwhitt. The menswear brand are famous for their smart shirts and suits, down to their comfy polos and chinos. They've even got Joe Root Support as their latest brand partner. Get 20% off head-to-toe outfits. Just head online to charlestyrwhitt.com and use the promo code Wisden23 at checkout. Update that wardrobe. For this week's show, the Charles Tyrwhitt moment of the week is that England have selected Josh Tongue to play at Lords. That news has literally just dropped. Ben, what do you make of that decision?
It's punchy, as is everything England do. I suppose it probably speaks quite a lot to the conditions that England are expecting. You know, you can't judge too much from pictures of a pitch taken 8 hours from the game. But equally, this one looks a lot greener than the Edgbaston surface did at the equivalent stage.
Yeah, but I always get frustrated by this chat. They can cut the grass.
That's true. Yeah, they can, and they likely will. Yes, but what you can't do is regrow grass, I guess. So
yeah. I guess the thing is that the pitch of the Ireland Test match was really slow. That England wouldn't have liked it. It was quite similar to what England got at Edgbaston. Mm-hmm. So you can see them leaving grass on it to inject a bit of pace and movement that was missing for the first 2 tests of the summer. Yeah, possibly. Yeah, and you know, pitch preparations is a hard thing as well. So there's always a bit of guesswork involved. But I'd imagine they've almost gone with they have gone with a point of difference, but it's more that they've gone with the 4 seamers, I think. And then from that point of view, it's interesting that yes, Tongue is maybe the quickest they have available. It's intriguing that Mark Wood is like, you hope there's nothing else going on there, that they are just reserving him for, you know, the 2 pitches that they think will suit him most, which might well be Old Trafford and the Oval, and there's not something else going on. I would have really liked to see him in one of these first 2 tests, and it's in a way it's un-England, I think, but like this New England side, like McCullum has said in the past, that you kind of you just pick your best attack for the game, and then you kind of worry about who's fit for the next one after that. That's seemingly not the approach unless there's something we don't know about Mark Wood. But then there are other seamers that they had in that squad. Potts has been released to go back to Durham to play in the last 2 games of that County Championship game. But Chris Wokes is there as well, and especially that tail now, when you consider how important tail end runs were. Not that England bothered to try and get any in the first innings, but apart from that, how important they were at Edgbaston. When you've got a tail of Broad, Robinson, Tongue, Anderson, that is significantly weaker than it would have been with Moeen in it, and it's significantly weaker than it would have been with Chris Wokes in it as well. But I guess Australia got all those runs with 3 number 11s, so England probably think they can do the same.
England picked 4 number 11s and backing those. Yeah.
With Wokes as well, he averages 11.33 at Lords with the ball, so it's not just about strengthening the tail. He's actually really, really good at Lords. So it's interesting that they've gone with Tongue over Wokes, or seemingly not not massively considered Wokes in the selection, especially if you're playing 4 seamers. I can almost see it more if you're playing 3 seamers, but playing 4 and then not considering Wokes, I think's a little bit odd. Maybe?
I guess if they want 4 seamers and Stokes isn't going to bowl that much, they will want one of those 4 seamers to be noticeably different in terms of what they're giving the attack. And I guess they still want to play Anderson, Broad and Robinson. And Wokes doesn't actually add that much difference to the other 3. I guess I'm slightly surprised that they've stuck with all 3 of those guys. I don't know. I just find it, if you take a step back, Josh Tongue playing the Ashes Test at Lords, who would have predicted that 6 months ago? This guy had barely played a first class game. I know he bowled well against Ireland. He took a 5 in the second innings, but we'll get on to Ireland later. Irish cricket is not quite the force that it once was.
Yeah.
And this is a guy who hasn't played that much first class cricket, let alone Test cricket. You know, a lot of people talking about the lack of cricket that Moeen Ali's played in the last few years. That's a guy who had played 60 odd Test matches. Josh Tongue is someone who's played just a handful of first class matches in the last few years. He's not taken 20 first class wickets in a summer going back to 2018. It's an amazing story. I know we talked about that going into the Ireland Test match, but now he's doing it in an Ashes Test match. It is an extraordinary rise. And I guess in his favour is that because England have so many bowling options, Root's going to bowl more than he'd bowl at Edgbaston. You'd imagine that if it doesn't go great for him, he can be hidden a little bit.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. It's a great story, and as we said before, Arnold almost just cut and paste that chat a little bit. That it's I like the thinking from England that you pick a guy that you like, and then when he's in form, you get him in the side. He got Steve Smith LBW, didn't he, earlier in the summer? So who knows? Maybe that's going to think if you can keep Smith quiet again.
And I guess he was quicker than we expected in the Ireland Test match. He touched 90 miles per hour, and we thought he was quicker than the rest of the options England had available. Yeah. So we probably didn't think he was capable of hitting that speed. Yeah,
I guess. Yeah, but then he wasn't. There's still a difference between that and what Mark Wood has been capable of at his quickest. And it's if there's anything that these Australian players like, Mark Wood is so quick that he will ruffle anyone. That speed is something that maybe Australia would be almost more used to playing than any other team in the world. So I guess it's going to be fascinating to see how it goes. And also, he's a pretty skillful bowler as well, right? He's not just that he's, some come in, just bowl quick, and that's absolutely it. I think we'll see some size of Josh Tongue in this Test match, I think.
A fair bit of my script was about the call-up of Rehan Ahmed, but he's not going to play now, but I don't want it to go completely to waste. Katya, that was a typically bold call from England to pick the 18-year-old leg spinner as cover for the guy who's played 1 first-class game in the last 2 years over a guy. I know that Liam Dawson has had an amazing county championship game since that decision was made. He scored 141 and he got 6 for 38 so far in that Middlesex first innings, but that was the most Bazball of Bazball selections, asking Rehan to be Moeen's cover.
Yeah, I think my kind of initial reaction to it was that makes sense. Not probably because obviously the Bazball thing, but also that it was Jax and Rehan that went to Pakistan, and Rehan outbowled Jax in Pakistan, and Jax hasn't really been bowling much as Surrey's frontline spinner in the county championship so far, regardless of what Rehan's been doing in the county championship, which amounts to not very much with the ball. It still makes sense to pick him over Jax. With Dawson, they were just never going to pick Liam Dawson because he's far too sensible. So yeah, I guess if you're looking at it from the who would Brendan McCullum pick, it makes a lot of sense. If you're looking at it through the who would anyone mildly sane pick, I think it doesn't make a massive amount of sense. I think you would rather go with someone who has more experience when you're 1-0 down in an Ashes series rather than pick the 18-year-old. But then they like Rehan and they think he's really, really good, and he probably is really, really good. So from that angle, it does make sense. But as you said, he's not going to play. So, all of that time spent discussing and dissecting every minutiae regarding his selection. Yeah. I think it's quite funny as well that Moeen Ali's selection caused such a kind of furore within everything. And then he plays one game, gets injured and isn't playing anymore. Yeah. So,
yeah. I would still expect Moeen to play a further part in this series. I mean, I'd imagine... there's going to be a press conference from Ben Stokes in an hour or so, which will, I guess, explain the decision more. But, Moeen was bowling on Monday, which is great. But I think, and it was coming out fine, but you're just not sure if that skin is completely healed or if it's going to, come off again, and you can't, going into a Test match. And that happens on day one. All of a sudden, you're kind of stuffed down to a 10-man team for the rest of the game. Like if Moan just keeps bowling nets, gets that sort of a bit calloused up, a bit hardened, then I think he'll come right back into it, because I think from a bowling point of view, he showed those glimpses of why Moan was such a brilliant Test cricketer for a time, and why England went back to him, and all it was that small physical thing, and if that's healed, I can see that he is still the spinner that they'll go to. I think.
James wrote in to say, long-time listener, first-time emailer. I listen to lots of podcasts. I listen to podcasts every day, but Wisden remains my number one choice. Yet, I found the tone of last week's podcast to have missed the point of this England team. Of course, they care about winning, but they also know that by being positive, they're giving themselves a chance of winning and, more importantly, keeping people engaged. Should they have declared? Possibly not, but at the time, it was an exciting and positive decision which grabbed everyone's attention. To show the impact this England team have, I will relay the following story. Last week, I coached a Year 5 D team. During the innings break, I overheard one of my team saying a drop catch during our innings reminded them of Ben Stokes' drop off Nathan Lyon. Listening to the conversation develop, it turned out many of the team had spent the previous evening watching the highlights of the test with their parents and were gripped by what they had seen. These children usually believe sport isn't for them or have no interest. Yet here they were discussing test match cricket and wanting to emulate Ben Stokes and his team. Winning will always be important, but this England team know that playing the way they are will be far more important for the future of cricket in this country, and therefore worth much more than any one-off victory. Analyse their performance, question the selections, but sport is settled by fine margins. This team will be remembered far more fondly than any other England team by a generation of new and old cricket fanatics. Despite all this, you remain my number one podcast choice. Thanks very much, James. I think there's a lot that's fair in that. Completely hear what you're saying. At the start of the series, I did say that even if England lose fairly comfortably, I don't think that means what they're trying to do is wrong. I just think that it's possible for England to inspire a generation and also win. And I think part of the frustration for me at Edgbaston was they had the game under control and they kind of threw it away in that third innings. And I think losing by such a small margin might add a degree of ruthlessness that has been missing recently, but also I think isn't mutually exclusive with their brand of cricket. I think they can be ruthless and do what they're doing. I also think they do need to win at some point to keep the series interesting. Because I don't know what the playground chat's going to be like if England are 2 or 3-0 down.
Yeah, it's interesting though. Actually, like, can England do what they're doing? Can you do 85%, 90% bat as ball? Is that a thing that exists?
I think they did that last summer.
I guess so. Yeah, I guess they did, and that sort of answers the question. But it's still like so much of this does depend on. It feels like it depends on total buy-in, total exoneration for any brave decision made, total all-out attack, total focus on this. Is Joe Root getting coming down the track and getting stumped? Is that somehow integral? I mean, it's a tricky thing to kind of match together because the success of it has been that they have entirely divorced result from process, from the having fun and the enjoyment is central basically, and obviously it's enjoyment because you're doing things that should help you win, but it's the enjoyment that's the main part. And if you then start saying basically it's a messaging thing that needs to be gotten right. It doesn't mean that you can't put the messaging in a way that gets that all across, but for them to now just say, actually we really need to win this one, Joe, you're going to have to dig in, you're going to have to put away the reverse scoop, you're going to have to stay in your crease with Nathan Lyon, or whatever the message might be to any of the players. Not that Root's the biggest problem by any stretch. It's a tricky thing to get right. I mean, they have, it seems, they've had other tricky messages to deliver before, and it seems like they've basically got them right. Even, I think with Ben Folkes, he, even up to the start of this summer, felt central to the England side, even having been left out in Pakistan, right? Which is that's a tricky thing to do from a man management point of view, and they did it well. They managed to integrate two very green spinners in a way that made them key to the side and then leave them out, and yet that still feels like they handled that really well. They have been good at managing through this, and if they do feel that maybe a change of tack is needed to win some games, I would back them to do it. But it is an interesting question of how they go about it, I think.
Yeah. I think the issue was that test match was the perfect one to expose all of the different tensions within Bazball, because they lost by such a fine margin, but they also there was some moments where it was just like, oh, if you just knuckled down there, if you just done that, you would have won it. And I don't like going if, but you know, if they'd taken all their chances, if they'd done certain things differently, then they would have won it. And it just allows people to kind of go, well, you know, they're not playing smart cricket, they're playing brainless cricket. When actually I don't think they are playing brainless cricket. I think they're doing something that's quite well thought out, even though that sounds ridiculous saying it. But you know, if England had come out on top in that test by a tiny bit, everyone would go, oh my god, isn't Bazball amazing? And just because they were on the wrong side of the result, I'm not necessarily sure it demands a complete kind of dissection of whether it's the right way to do things or not. And at the end of the day, they can't roll back from it now. So
100%. That pitch at Edgbaston is exactly the kind of pitch that England sides in the recent past would comfortably finish second best against Australia. And yeah, just because they got themselves in a position to win the game and didn't quite do it, that doesn't mean that the method that got them to the position where they were in total control, not quite total control, but in control of the game, wasn't the right one to use.
I think so. And the other thing as well, like it's amazing that England just, like, it is amazing when you pull out a bit that England are competing with Australia at all, right? Like when you actually, like when you remove all the bluster and all the, you know, when you remove, you know, the 14 wins from 17 or whatever it is from there, or 11 wins from 14, isn't it?
Yeah.
From the record. And you actually go through the England team, it's like, okay, you've got a top three, none of whom are really established in Test cricket. You've got a number 5 who's like 7 tests in. You've got a number 6 who has one knee. You've got a number 7 who, you know, had one leg until a few weeks ago. You've got a bowling attack that consists of, you know, a 36-year-old, a 40-year-old, you know, a guy who bowls 124 kph nude nuts, and a guy who hasn't taken, you know, 20 first-class wickets since 2018 or whatever it is. And yet they're going toe-to-toe with an Australian lineup with, you know, like a bowling attack that is basically all Australia greats, an all-time great in Steve Smith, you know, David Warner, Marnus Labuschagne, Travis Head and Usman Khawaja, 2 of the most informed batters on the planet, Cameron Green, the next Jack Callis. You know, when you boil it down like that, England shouldn't be competing, and yet
I agree.
They're talking. The fact that they are talking as if they are favourites and as if they are dominating is the reason they're getting even close, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. Cricket is on the front pages again today, but not for the right reasons, as is so often the case. The long-anticipated report from the Independent Commission for Equity in Cricket has released an extremely thorough report that concludes that English cricket suffers from widespread and deep-rooted racism, sexism, elitism and class-based discrimination at all levels of the game and urgently needs reform. The report was chaired by Sidney Butts, and the committee included former England and Surrey all-rounder Zafar Ansari. It made 44 recommendations to English cricket, including that the ECB should apologise for their past wrongdoings. I guess I was pleasantly surprised on how specific and wide-reaching the recommendations were. It calls for equal pay between the men's and women's game, providing a workable timeline, and it's very specific about how that can be achieved. There's a call for the Harrow-Eton match to no longer take place at Lords and instead be replaced by a National State Schools Finals Day. The document is entitled Holding Up a Mirror to Cricket, which I think is appropriate. There's a lot of ugliness that's just been allowed to linger without comment for years. And this report, Ben, rightfully highlights many, many issues, but crucially also suggests practical solutions.
Yeah, look, it's 317 pages, so haven't had time to read every single one of those. If you want to do it yourself, I'd say go to the icec.com/report. And then you can go and read the full report. It's out there, it's publicly. And if you're going to skip to one bit, I'd say go to the recommendations, because actually picking through those, you see some of the things that they will have taken the ECB and cricket in general to task for. But yeah, I like the specificity of a lot of the recommendations, including, say, so the equal pay for women and men. It specifically delineates, like, you know, match fees straight away, regional. Introducing rookie regional contracts, get them on the same level as men's county salaries, and then eventually international and salaries for men's and women to be the same by 2030. I think like that's it's delineated clearly in what is an achievable but ambitious way, which is exactly as it should be. I also like the things that actually don't have not a fixed time frame, but a fixed that don't have any sort of deadline when they'll be completed, because they're necessarily on running. Things that say that, you know, every 3 years the ECB should deliver a report into this and a report into that. And also I like how much of it is focused on class as well as on race and gender. It recommends that say that the code of conduct is expanded beyond what are the current protected characteristics to include class-based characteristics in particular, and that underlies a lot of the stuff. I guess especially with some of the race stuff, there is certain aspects of it that are also about just access into the game as well. So yeah, it's a really, really thorough piece of work. If you go through those recommendations, you'll see actually that there are things that, within years the ECB needs to do, things the ECB needs to do immediately, and also crucially things the ECB needs to do within the next few months. And those will be the things that if the ECB aren't doing those, then that'll be the time where you can hold the ECB up again and then again and again kind of thing. So this is, I think we said it when the CDC, and actually there were recommendations about the CDC as well, about how that can be reformed. But after those hearings, when there was so much focus on Michael Vaughan and what he might or might not have said, and it felt like we're getting hopelessly lost among the weeds of something that in the end for the rejuvenation and the life of English cricket going forward kind of didn't matter, I guess. Whether one man had said something a bit iffy at one point. This doesn't avoid the details at all. It's completely thorough, but equally it gives there is a path forward from this document, as much as there is so much work that needs to be done as it lines out.
And I guess in a society that has that battles sexism, racism, elitism across society, the report does actually specifically look at examples where cricket has particularly failed. So I think in reports like this in the past, you can sometimes make the accusation that, hang on, are you really separating the organisation, institution from wider societal problems? I think in this case, it does actually show where cricket has been particularly poor. Yeah,
and there's also a way that kind of, it's a society problem can be used to excuse things at certain times. Like there is still individual responsibility. Just because society is, it makes it easy to be a certain way doesn't mean that people have to act in that certain way, and people will still be doing things that they know that are wrong or should realise that are wrong. And going through the recommendations, as I say, like even if there is, that all of those are things that cricket can and should just do basically. And that's, hopefully there will be some change to wider society within the next 7 years as well. But these are things that are within cricket's control, that aren't dependent on more general attitudes changing. These things they should just be able to do and put in place. And if they do, then maybe we'll reach the sport that we can be proud to play in and work in and watch and enjoy, I guess.
We are all understandably getting more concerned about cybercrime, with the stealing of private data and invasion of privacy becoming commonplace these days. NordVPN offers you sound protection from cybercrime. Grab your exclusive NordVPN deal by going to nordvpn.com/Wisden to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan, plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The Cricket World Cup qualifier has thrown out the biggest story in world cricket this week. West Indies are on the brink of elimination from the tournament. Even a 100% record from here could see them not make the World Cup in India later this year. I spoke to Santokie from the excellent Caribbean Cricket podcast about what has gone wrong for West Indies. I'm joined by Santokie from the Caribbean Cricket podcast. Santokie, first off, 20 or so hours after the occasion, West Indies aren't quite out of the qualifier just yet. It's not looking good though. How are you feeling?
To be honest, yes, I'm still trying to process what was an unbelievable loss for West Indies. I mean, if you post 374, generally, I think the only time a team have posted a higher amount in an ODI and gone on to lost was the famous South Africa-Australia ODI, which is also like an anomaly in ODI cricket. So to post 374 and end up losing, not only losing in the manner of going to a super over and then losing, a big blow for West Indies cricket. And I kind of draw back to, there was a moment, you might have seen it, it went viral about 2 years ago after we lost an ODI series to Ireland. And a local fan called up a TV show, Sportsmax in the Caribbean, and said, we should rip up all the cricket pitches in the Caribbean and plant ganja and cassava. West Indies cricket is a waste of time. And I feel that perfectly sums up the collective mood of fans across the Caribbean this morning.
Netherlands are without several first-team players who are playing county cricket at the moment. I mean, before we get into the wider problems around West Indies cricket, this West Indies side is much, much stronger than the Netherlands side that played yesterday. What went wrong for West Indies in that particular match, do you think?
I think it was sort of it's reflective of West Indies' current state in ODI cricket in terms of they sort of lost their heads towards the end of the game. The pressure got to them, and we've seen it not only in this tournament for the past few years. When it's come down to a high pressure situation, no one is able to really stand up and adapt to that pressure. There were some small things we could have changed in the match. For instance, bowling Roston Chase in the penultimate over. In that situation, when you've got Van Beek in the form he is, do you really want to bring an off spinner into the equation? And 21 went off his over. The fact we managed to bring it back, because Netherlands did only need four balls at one point to win, we brought it back to a super over. You thought that would have been a wake-up call for the side. However, Jason Holder coming out to bowl the super over, I mean, hindsight's a lovely thing, but it was a questionable choice, especially with Alzari Joseph in the form he's in. You would have thought it would have been logical for him to come on. I don't know if it was a case of him being blown out essentially by bowling that final over, so they went with Holder. Holder, who was disciplined throughout the game, terrible super over, bowled a lot of full tosses, missed his line and length a lot of times, and again, that's the pressure telling on him. And then coming out to bat, I mean, we needed 31 to win. You essentially needed someone to do a Yuvraj Singh and hit 6 sixes. Johnson Charles was a logical choice, but Shai Hope, I still don't understand why Shai Hope came out to bat in that super over. He's the captain. He obviously made the decision. But when you've got, a Jason Holder, Kia Lassane, Kemo Paul, Brandon King, who can all smash sixes across the park, I just don't understand why they went with Shai Hope. So, I mean, it is, as I said, it's reflective of a longer-term issue in West Indies cricket. But even within the match, there were small things that could have been done differently. And I haven't even mentioned the fielding. In the tournament, probably West Indies have been the worst side in terms of dropping catches and poor fielding. And this just shows a lack of mental fortitude. And I just don't know. You mentioned about Netherlands missing players and being an associate side. I just don't know if it's also complacency in the West Indies side, the fact that they are West Indies relying on that legacy and heritage to sort of carry them through, which happened in the last qualifying tournament in 2018 in Zimbabwe.
I mean, I think for people who don't follow this competition that closely, I think it's important for them to realise just how cutthroat these qualifying competitions are. The one in Zimbabwe in 2018 was similarly cutthroat. There's very little room for error. I mean, West Indies were very close to not qualifying for the 2019 World Cup as well. I mean, just hearing you speak, it kind of sounds like everything that could have gone wrong has gone wrong. So to someone who doesn't follow West Indies that closely, they might look at the team sheet and go, yeah, that's pretty strong, but where's someone like Hetmeyer? Can you give like a bit of background to why, I guess, the best 11 available West Indian cricketers aren't playing for West Indies in a match that is so important?
Well, yeah, this is also another thing. I guess the problem for West Indies is, I mean, it would be great to say after this tournament, we're missing a lot of players who can come in and sort of rejuvenate the side. But the matter of fact is, you mentioned Hetmeyer, that's one player, potentially Evan Lewis as well. But other than that, 90% of this side are the best white ball players in the region. So you've essentially got a team that's come together. We've seen what Pooran can do in the IPL. We've seen Carl Mayers, Alzari Joseph, talented players. However, it's more to do with the structural issues of West Indies cricket. I feel in the past, when we've had structural issues, but the likes of Gale, Pollard, DJ Barvo, they've been generational talents who could kind of rise above in spite of the structural challenges. Whereas this side, they're not great players, but they're very good players. And I think that difference has counted a lot in terms of the structural issues affecting them. In regards to Shimron Hetmeyer, he hasn't played ODI cricket since 2021. He famously missed the T20 World Cup last year for missing a plane. He couldn't get on the plane to Australia. So he's someone I don't know if we'll see him in West Indies colours anytime soon. Evan Lewis as well. We asked Desmond Haynes in a press conference, where is Evan Lewis? The answer was he's currently working on his house. He's got a few things to do fixing his house. He'll be back in September. So Evan Lewis obviously has bigger priorities than the World Cup qualifying tournament. So those two players aside, I would say generally this is the best side West Indies could probably have relied on. We were unfortunate that the leg spinner Yannick Carey was injured in the training sessions before the tournament. We missed him. But generally, a massive concern for West Indies is, if these are the best players, generally speaking, that we have, is it just a case of the talent not being good enough at the moment in the Caribbean?
What do you think that not qualifying for the World Cup, what does that mean for West Indies cricket? Is this basically as low as it gets? Like what happens next? Like people think of World Cups and Australia is probably the first team you think of, but second is West Indies. Only Australia have won the World Cup more times than they obviously won the first two in the 70s. But, you know, just this colossal figure in the world game. It won't feel like a World Cup without West Indies being there. So that's how the rest of the world feels. What would it feel like in the West Indies, do you think?
Massive. I mean, as you said, so last year we didn't qualify for the T20 main draw. We went out in the first round. However, as you said, I think the T20 World Cup doesn't have that legacy and heritage. The ODI World Cup is still the pinnacle. When you say World Cup, people think of the ODI World Cup. And as you mentioned, we won the first two editions, 75 and 79. So I think for fans, the symbolism of not qualifying for the pinnacle tournament in white ball cricket is going to be massive. We spoke on the Caribbean Cricket podcast to Dr. Kishore Shallow, the new Cricket West Indies president, who's obviously got a massive job on his hands. And he said to us, West Indies have to qualify for this tournament in India. There's no two ways about it. The players know the assignment. Darren Sammy knows the assignment. So there's going to be a massive fallout from this. And it's likely we're not going to qualify for the World Cup. You'd imagine Darren Sammy, who's emphasised a lot in the past few games, he inherited this side. He didn't pick it. He's essentially going to try and do a reset on this white ball side to try and galvanise them. But as I said, with the lack of talent pool we have, I don't know how big a reset you can do to change the fortunes of West Indies cricket.
I guess that's something that if you look at West Indies compared to the other big nations, something that sticks out is actually how few young players are playing for West Indies at the moment. So that if you go by like the metric of guys under the age of 24 who play internationally, obviously you got Seals, who's brilliant, but is a bowler, but there really isn't that much batting coming through. What's changed over the last 15 years has meant that West Indies just isn't producing the same volume of top tier batters, do you think?
I think it's a lack of opportunities. We only have 6 franchise sides in our regional game, and they obviously each the unusual thing with West Indies cricket is it's not like England where counties have kind of a longer term goal of producing for England. There's nationalism in the West Indies. So Trinidad and Tobago will want to win the regional tournament for Trinidad and Tobago pride. Same with Guyana, same with Jamaica. So rather than looking long term towards developing young players, they pick the best players there and now who can win short term. And this obviously has a roll-on effect for West Indies cricket, because players in the side who we talk about as quote-unquote young, Hetmeyer, Pooran, they're 26, 27 years old. As you said, we don't really have anyone coming through. And that's a wider issue in terms of how do you resolve that issue? What incentive do you provide to local regional sides to, input that youth development?
I mean, you said you had a chat with a new president. If you were in charge of West Indies cricket, what would you do? What would be the first thing on your list of things to address in terms of changing that structure to kind of avoid situations like this potentially coming up in the future?
I'd rip up all the cricket fields and start planting Andrew cassava. I think you have to. It's hard because you have to have dialogue with the regional territorial boards, but at the same time you don't have complete authority over them. You essentially have to work. So improving that communication. And in terms of looking directly at this ODI side, I think we're not going to qualify for the 2025 Champions Trophy in Pakistan because we're not in the top 8 sides. So I think you just look at it as a 4-year project. So does Darren Sammy start bringing players? We've got the West Indies Academy who have done really well in the past year or so. Do you just bring in a bulk of players from that academy, put them into the ODI side and say, listen, immediate results aren't expected, but you need that experience looking towards the 2027 ODI World Cup in South Africa?
Well, it's not over yet. It's worth reiterating that. But Santokie, thank you so much for your time. And I guess a lot of cricket fans who aren't that invested in the qualifier will definitely be willing West Indies on from afar, given everything West Indies have done for world events over the last 30 or so years.
Thank you very much. And, if we do manage to do a miracle comeback and qualify for the World Cup, I'll be glad to come on and present I'll be in a different frame of mind.
I look forward to it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Ben, it is just worth dwelling on that game against the Netherlands. Genuinely up there with one of the greatest ODIs of all time and one of the greatest ODI performances of all time from Logan van Beek, who might not even be playing for the Netherlands by the time the World Cup comes along.
Yeah, I don't really know where you start with this one, which is how it is with all the best games, I guess.
Start with Van Beek.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So for people who don't know what happened.
So when he comes in, actually, let me get the exact score up, because I think it is worth just giving people, because you can sort of say the details quite generally. So he comes in at number 8, and it's about at this point when you think Netherlands have lost the game. So Teja Nidamanuru, he's actually got form for this. He made 100 number 7 to win a game off the last ball against Zimbabwe early this year. Netherlands don't do things the easy way, but he'd fallen along with the number 7 inside the 46 over, and at that point Netherlands need 50, just under 50 off the last 4 overs, and it's the tail in there. So you're like, okay, they did close. They've made they're already at that point 327. That was a new Netherlands record score. You're like, they've done pretty well, but that's the game done. Then Logan van Beek from nowhere takes on the 19th over in particular off Ross and Chase, I think.
It was,
yeah. He takes that apart, and all of a sudden, getting to the last over, they need 9 off 9, and you're like, how has this happened? Then it's 9 off 6. Sorry, hits 4 of the first ball, 5 off 5, and then because they're in with the chance, it tightens up again. There's a single, there's a wicket, they run a bye, they somehow scramble a 2, and then so firstly off the 2, there's a check for a 1 short, which is found to be legal, and then off the last ball, there's a brilliant catch by Jason Holder, but also just the tiniest part of the heel is behind the line on no ball check. You can be looking at it for absolutely ages and convince yourself either way. It's probably a fair enough call from the umpire, but it's absolutely brilliant. But the Netherlands have tied it, and it's in the rules that it's a super over, so it has to be that. And then Netherlands choose to send out, not, their openers got them off to, smash 70 inside the power play. Don't go with one of them. Don't have the guy take strike who's, scored 111 off 76. They send out Van Beek again to take strike against Jason Holder, one of the premier rounders in world cricket. And he goes 4-6, 4-6, 6-4, 30 runs, the most anyone has scored off a super over in international cricket. And then this guy's on a hot streak in the form of his life. Why not let's give him the ball? Comes out, okay, goes for 6 with the first, and then single, wicket, game done. But up until that point in the game, before the last 4 overs, had taken 177, and then just becomes, Don Bradman, Gary Sobers, A.B. de Villiers, all in one for about 20 minutes of his life.
Boomerang.
Yeah, and wins the game. It's absolutely extraordinary.
Especially with all the players they're missing as well.
Yeah, well, yeah, because there's this issue. There's, in county cricket, there's supposed to be what they call mandatory release, where counties aren't allowed to hold players back from international cricket in theory. In effect, in reality, that's not really how it works, because the players themselves basically choose to stay behind. Sometimes that'll be with a bit of a quiet word from a county. Sometimes it won't be. They'll just know that if they, forego a bit of the T20 blast, then they'd be that much less likely to get the contract next year. But yeah, Netherlands have done this without some of their best players, which is extraordinary. Also, one more stat, by the way, I saw that in the 13,000 list day games that have ever been played, this is the highest scoring tie there has ever been.
Brilliant. Katya, Ireland have been knocked out after defeats to Oman, Scotland and Sri Lanka. For a full member nation to not even make the Super Sixes from which the top 2 teams qualify for the World Cup, that is a real shocker almost for Ireland, who actually came pretty close to qualifying for the World Cup through the World Cup Super League. Yeah,
they were in it right to the end, weren't they? They had those ODIs against Sri Lanka at Chelmsford where they could have at Chelmsford where they could have qualified for the tournament automatically. And it's really not great for Ireland cricket to not be at that World Cup anyway, but to not qualify for the Super Sixes is pretty difficult day. I think it was that game against Scotland that they really came undone. They lost it by 1 wicket pretty much off the last ball. And when you're on the wrong side of a result like that could have helped them get through to the Super Sixes, then that's not a great look for them. And especially losing against 2 non-full member sides is not a great tournament to have. I'm sure Josh Little is thrilled with his decision to miss the Lord's Test match in order to crash out of the World Cup qualifier. But yeah, it's really difficult, and it feels like quite difficult to see a path going forward for where cricket in Ireland is going, because to have that Test match at Lord's against England and all that kind of stuff, and then weeks later to not qualify for a World Cup is a pretty difficult paradox to unpick. So yeah, I'm not sure what the path is forward for them, but it's a pretty difficult time, I think, at the minute.
In the county game, Middlesex completed the highest ever chase in a domestic T20 game hauling down Surrey's 252 at the Kia Oval. Stevie Eskenazi hit 73 off 39 and Max Holden smashed 68 off 35 to take Middlesex over the line to end a really grim run of form. So that's their only win in 12 in the Blast this season. Will Jacks came very close to hitting 6 sixes in and over earlier in the game. He hit Luke Holman for 5 in a row and then was gifted a filthy full toss off the 6th ball, but could only cloth it for 1. The county championship is back this week. It's the first of 2 rounds where the Kookaburra ball will be used. The idea is that the Kookaburra moves less and for shorter periods than the Duke's ball. Kind of hard to come to too many conclusions from just a day's play so far, because the other big changeable to the county cricket played earlier in the summer is that it's hot and it's not April. A few headlines from the county game. Sam Billings has resigned as Kent's Red Bull captain after a grim run of scores with a bat. He's averaging less than 10 this year. Spinners are going all over the place. Don Bess has joined Warwickshire on loan from Yorkshire. Dan Moriarty has joined Yorkshire on loan from Surrey. And Matt Parkinson, who is joining Kent next year, has gone on loan to Durham. So loads going on there.
We also had Leicestershire, right? Leicestershire, the exodus of 3 key players there: Colin Ackerman, Chris Wright, and Callum Parkinson.
Big week in the Parkinson household.
Yeah,
Big.
The Parkinson one is understandable, right? Like he is one of the best red ball spinners in the country. He should be playing Div 1 cricket and pushing for a place in England Test squads at some point. The others, they're jobbing county cricketers. Those are really big losses. Those are players that Leicester have just kind of have let go to an extent. And Paul Nixon, the head coach, has been placed on gardening leave and seems likely to leave the club at the end of the season. And I think there'll be more to come out there. But
especially because they're actually doing okay in the championship. So this is one of their best seasons in a while in red ball cricket. That's a big story to follow. And finally, Ben, to finish the show, India have named a test squad for the upcoming tour of West Indies. I guess we wouldn't normally spend 2 minutes on an India test squad for a bilateral series, but it's a very interesting one actually. No Cheteshwar Pujara, Ajinkya Rahane has been promoted to vice captain, only a couple of tests after he was recalled, and Virat Kohli has been retained. It's interesting, I guess, because those 3 guys have done very similarly over the last few years and are of very similar age.
Yeah, and actually, I think if you'd look just at the last few years, Pujara would be the one who had done the best, because in that average of 29, he had that brilliant series in Australia where he faced about 1,000 balls, but still averaged 29 because he was just defying Pat Cummins over and over again. So if you're picking out a guy who, okay, that's a long time ago, but equally it's a long time ago when any of them have done anything that substantial, I think that shows maybe this is more of a transition thing than a form thing. They've picked Yashasvi Jaiswal in the squad, who I think they think is best at number 3, or at least him and Shubman Gill are both top 3 options, whichever way they end up. And so that's why I guess it's Pujara that might have had to move out. And then also there's actually changes in the seam bowl department as well. So there's no Mashadov in that squad. Shami, it seems, maybe rested, or maybe it's sort of a James Anderson Broad esque for the West Indies, give the big guys a bit of a kick. But then it's just interesting looking at that seam bowling attack as it is. It is just light on players who you're looking at to be world beaters. I think when India won that series in 2021 in Australia with, their whole first team out, basically, you're at that point thinking, okay, India are about to start dominating world cricket in a way that we kind of haven't seen before. Like, they've got so much strength and depth. They've got players coming out their ears. They're absolutely stacked. And yet those guys haven't really kicked on. It's hard to see what the Indian seam attack will be in a few years' time, and if that seam attack will be able to do what Bumrah and Shami have done in England and South Africa and Australia. So it's interesting times for Indian cricket, and still more transition to go yet, even though it's started, it seems.
Well, that's it for today's show. Cheers, Katya. Cheers, Ben. We'll be back for our first Lord's Daily show tomorrow evening.
Hi, I'm Kumar Sangakkara, and I'm speaking to you from the Kia Oval. Hello to all parents of young cricket fans. If you are 11 to 16 years old, or if you are a parent of an 11 to 16-year-old, then this message is for you. As part of the partnership between Surrey County Cricket Club and Kia, this amazing opportunity has been created to motivate and excite you, cricket's next generation. This is your chance as a young cricketer to play here on the hallowed green of the Kia Oval, where I spent some great years playing for Surrey in the sport that I love so much. You could be here at a coaching session with me on Saturday, September the 23rd, before playing out there on the field, courtesy of Kia, who have sponsored this club and ground for over a decade. Cricket has been a huge part of my life since I was a little boy, from the age of about 11 or 12, and I know what an opportunity like this would have meant to me. If you want the chance to be part of this, all you need to do is apply, and we might see each other in September.